author, The Backyard Beekeeper and Better Beekeeping, two of his titles. Also a prolific speaker in the beekeeping world and on the webinar floor. And Kim, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Common Sense Natural Beekeeping, and there's a lot of people that think that maybe those two phrases might not belong together. But what I want to do today is there's a lot of talk about beekeeping, natural beekeeping, and different ways to work with bees. And I just want to explore some of the concepts of how people and bees relate, and if you want to call it management or not management, where we can go, what we should be doing, and maybe things we shouldn't be doing with bees and for bees. And when we're done, we'll have some time. I hope we'll have some time for some questions. I talk to a lot of people who are really concerned about the present state of bees, beekeeping, beekeepers, pollinators, pollination, that whole part of the world. So let's take a look at what we can do here. And when I started looking at this, okay, what's natural? When you say natural beekeeping, and I went to Merriam-Webster dictionary, and here's some of the phrases that came out: not made or caused by people. That is a term we can apply to a lot of things we do, not only in bees and beekeeping, but in the rest of our life. Growing without human care, no extra substances or chemicals added. So what I want to do is I want to take those three phrases, those are the three that kind of stuck out when I looked up the definition of natural, and see how they apply to what we traditionally do with bees, and maybe we could be doing better, and we'll take it from there. So what I want to do is take a look at probably the four major incursions that we have with bees when we begin to keep bees, if you will: housing, health, food, and management. And those are the four biggest things that we have that affect bees. So let's take a look at. There you have it. That's as natural as you can get. A domicile chosen by the bees. They're happy there. They survive there. They're doing just fine there. But the phrase says it's not keeping bees. It's bees keeping themselves. And this is as natural as it gets. Total, zero, complete, no interference by people. Maybe that bear's got an idea, but as far as keeping bees, it's not keeping bees. But we all kind of know the history of how bees and people started getting together, and really what happened was there were containers that people made that bees found inviting and found, I'm looking at skeps here, but skeps started as a basket that was overturned, and they were the right volume, and they were dry, and they were safe, and they were solid, and the bees, a swarm, undoubtedly found a basket and said, hey, we're home. This is as good as it gets. And people and bees began interacting in some way like that. People were able to move the colony because they could pick up the basket, they could harvest the honey, they could do all of these things, but it was a container that was picked by bees in the first place, just like that tree. They found it as accommodating a place to live as the inside of that tree was that we just looked at. So there that interaction began, and where it goes from there, let's take a quick look. And here's another container that bees find accommodating, and the side of a house or a building or electric meter or any of the places that bees find. It's got the right volume, it's warm, it's safe, it's dry, it's everything that bees need to have a nest. Now, is this natural? And I don't know the answer to that, but if bees choose it, my thought is that it must work at least well enough for them to choose it. Now, you can argue, and I would argue that bees choose these places because there's no better place for them to go. We are running out of hollow trees. We are running out of natural nesting sites, so these sites may be a second best choice, a third best choice. We can't find anything at all choice. but it is a choice that they make. So whether it's in a hollow tree or in the side of a building, it is a choice that bees make given the environment that they live in and have to adapt to. So when you take a look at take this the next step, and you take a look at the log hives are hung on trees where bees are migratory. This is out of Africa, but bees migrate. They have a rainy season and they move on to a place where it's not rainy, and people put up hollow logs, and bees move in because it's the right volume, it's safe, it's warm, it's dry, it's everything bees need to live. When the rainy season comes, they migrate on, and people come in and they hollow out the log. People just took that simple technology and put it on the ground, and with simple equipment made it so rather than enter the cavity from the end, you could enter it from the top, and you have a top bar hive. And basically the hive and the top bar hive and a hive and a log hive look basically the same. And is this natural? Bees choose it, and bees thrive in both of these kinds of containers. So, but here's where things change, and we've evolved from hollow logs and baskets and gums, which were hollow trees that we were just cut and moved, to the Langstroth hive. But then again, you look at this and you say, is this natural? Is it any less natural or more natural than the side of a house or the inside of a basket that somebody hangs in a tree? And there's no doubt that the Langstroth hive is made to benefit man by making keeping bees easier. And you can say that we have benefited definitely from keeping bees in Langstroth hives. There's no doubt about that. And when you've got a couple of colonies in the backyard, you look at this and say, this is probably not a bad way. But then you look down at the holding yards in California before almond season, and when you put that many bees in that small of an area, that is about as unnatural as you can get. Tom Seeley's work has shown that there's about a colony per acre in a big woods, and that for bees is probably not a bad density. You've got enough isolation that you're not sharing everything that you got, all of the disease and problems that you've got, but at the same time, you've got enough bees in an area to ensure adequate vegetation pollination. So going from 2 or 3 colonies in the backyard to thousands in a field in California has definitely taken us a long ways from what bees would choose as natural, even though the container is similar. But the density and the management and all of that we've moved far away from anything that you would consider to be natural. It's industrial beekeeping, there's no doubt about it. But it makes the agriculture that they serve possible. And therein lies what is best for the people that are keeping the bees, is having enough bees to pollinate thousands and thousands of acres of almonds in the Central Valley of California natural. Like I said, we can explore that all you want, but I'm kind of thinking that's less than the best way to be going. The second way that we touch with bees' lives is considering honeybee health, and when it comes to honeybee health, probably the best, the most visible aspect we have are the chemicals that we use to deal with the things that are bothering bees. And when it comes to health, Varroa, American Foulbrood, Nosema, and wax moth are probably the 4 biggest that we interfere with when it comes to chemicals. So let's take a look at these for just a moment. There's certainly some other chemicals that we work with bees with. Honey substitutes and high fructose corn syrup and sucrose and the sucralose, all of the things that we feed bees that aren't honey. But even honey, If you want to look at this and you say, okay, I'm feeding bees, should I be feeding them? And if I'm feeding them, is giving them honey natural? And you can say, well, they rob other hives, and so giving them honey probably is as natural as it can get. So what about pollen supplements? Those I've never seen a honeybee eat a soybean in my life, but the soybean components and the other components and pollen supplements are certainly healthy and not bad. Not as good as pollen, but we're going to look at those in a minute. Removing honey repellents, fume boards. Is there anything at all natural about that? And probably not. Brushing bees even removing honey. We're going to look at harvesting here in a moment. Stimulating feeding behavior. Honeybee Healthy. There's a product that I recommend for a lot of reasons because it does stimulate bees that are not eating well to eat better. And nosema, of course, is a classic there. Bees that have nosema go off feed essentially, and they don't go back on feed unless there's some stimulant, and Honeybee Healthy works well for that. Is letting them die, letting them starve because they're sick, a good thing to do? What about applying smoke to a hive? And there's a lot of people that think that that's bad, and if you've ever taken a face full of smoke from your smoker, you're probably going to agree with that. Every once in a while you get a whiff and you spend the next 10 minutes clearing your lungs. So is applying smoke to a hive a good thing to do, or is it minimal interference and probably not a problem? I'm not commonly in a beehive. I'm not the person getting smoked. I'm not the insect getting smoked. So I can't say is it natural, but you've all taken a hit of smoke and you probably have a feel for that. So are some chemicals good? Are some bad? What do we need to do with this when it comes to honeybee health? What can we do to make sure that the honeybee health continues so that honeybees continue? Do we just leave them alone and not do anything, or do we interfere a little, or do we interfere a lot? And that's kind of what I want to explore, because if we don't do anything at all, is letting bees die because we don't do anything a recommended activity, and I kind of wonder about that. The best way to not have to do anything with your bees is to have better bees. And you'll see, you talk to people, you'll listen to people in classes, and you'll read in the books that what you want are bees that are survivors, that are resistant to the diseases and pests and problems that bees have. I use Russians as an example of dealing with Varroa on a fairly good level, not perfect, but better than a lot of other ones. So the best way is to find is to use these, but how do you define a better bee? And the first thing that I think of is bees that are adapted to your location. I was in Texas yesterday, and it was 100 degrees with 100% humidity, and although I was visiting a beekeeper there, and we were in the country, and there were lots and lots and lots of wildflowers blooming, there wasn't a bee out there. And there wasn't a bee out there because it was so hot that none of the plants were producing nectar. Those bees were adapt to that pretty well. They're used to the hot weather, the high humidity, and not having to, not being able to forage when our bees up here would really want to be foraging for that. So, are they adapted to your location? Most of the bees in the U.S. come from either the southeast, Georgia, or northern Florida, or the west coast, California. And our Georgia bees adapted to where I am in northeast Ohio. I don't know, but I'm going to guess that a bee that spent several generations learning to adapt to northeast Ohio conditions is going to be a better bee for my area than one that spent several generations in southern Georgia. Resistant or tolerant to moderate to high levels of common pests and diseases, and that to me just goes without saying. Bees should be able to take care of most things. And of course, survival is going to be, for these, is going to be a bell curve. Some populations of bees will succumb rapidly, some will never succumb, and most are somewhere in between. And that's what I would like, some of those in between. We've got introduced pests, going to look at two of them, Varroa and small hive beetle, that our bees are not adapted to yet. And our bees in the U.S. have only had 30 years of evolutionary time to learn to live with Varroa mites. Is 30 years enough? And I think what we have done in the short term has slowed down that adaptation to Varroa, but we'll look at that in a minute. Exhibiting moderate to hygienic behavior, certainly that's one of the attributes of resistance. A paper just came out this week on looking at the difference between Africanized honeybees and European bees in terms of grooming mites off of them. That good hygienic behavior, one of the attributes of good hygienic behavior. So Africanized bees have a leg up on our European bees because they're better at that. I want some of that. I would like to have some of that in my bees. I don't want that to be the exclusive resistance mechanism because there's other things going on, but having that as part of my bees' genome is certainly a good idea. Wintering well where you winter. I learned to winter bees in northern Wisconsin, and the winters in northeast Ohio are close, but no cigar when it comes to northern Wisconsin. And then I've kept bees in Connecticut, and as I said yesterday, I was in Texas where they may have a couple of days of frost where I was in the winter, and that's about it. So the bees in Texas never quit raising brood. 365 days a year there's brood in our hive. In northern Wisconsin, we went weeks and weeks and weeks without brood because of the weather. And the clustering practices that the bees did there. So do I want a bee in northern Wisconsin that never quits raising brood? And I think that's probably not a good adaptive feature that I want up there. So when I'm learning to winter wherever it is I'm wintering, I want bees that said, yeah, I remember last year, and this is what we have to do to thrive. Reacting quickly and efficiently to the resources in their environment. And what I mean by that is that, and I'll use as an example, Russian bees. And Russian bees are extremely good at dealing with available nectar flows. And if you've watched Russian bees at all, the thing I like about them is that in my part of Ohio in the spring, they're very slow to take off. And it's because we have such fickle springs here. And it's cold and it's rainy and it's hot and it's sunny and it's cold and it's rainy. And the Russian bees are going to sit down and they just hunker down and they say, okay, when you decide that it's going to really be spring and stay spring, then we'll get going. And that's what they do. So they're much later coming out in the spring than the Italians or Carniolans or the mixes that you get from traditional queen producers. And by the same token, when we here in this part of Ohio, we run into a sort of a moderate dearth starting about the 4th of July. Things slow right down. The first spring flush is done. The fall flush hasn't started, and there's just not a lot blooming. And the Russians go, okay, it's time to slow down. And they go to almost no brood at all in the middle until late July. You can look at the pattern, and lots of brood and once they start slowing down in the midsummer, and then they will perk up again for the fall flow when we have goldenrod and asters that come back. So that's what I mean about reacting quickly and efficiently to the resources. If there's no food coming in, there's no brood to feed. If there's lots of food coming in, they're going to start raising brood, and that's a real efficient way to run a colony from my perspective. So those are the kind of bees that I'm looking for that are able to react like that. Productive and easy to work. Of course, gentle is always more fun than not, but it's not a requirement in terms of bee survival, certainly. In fact, not being gentle probably has a lot to do with better survival when it comes to defending a colony from all of the things that they have to defend themselves against, including beekeepers. So is gentle necessary? Not really. And if you take a look at bees that have survived several generations in wherever it is that they are, characteristically you're going to find out that they are very productive because they know the environment and they've adapted well to the resources in their environment and when they're available, and they defend their colony from everything that they need to defend them against. So it used to be that if you wanted to make a lot of honey, you needed a lot of bees, and they needed to be mean. And the reason they were mean, by a beekeeper's perspective, is that they were used to having to be very defensive to keep everything away from the honey that they made. But it comes down to availability, and you can take a look at any of the bee magazines that exist, the ones from the UK and the ones from the US and Australia and New Zealand, and are there survivor bees being advertised? And pretty much across the board, no. And it's not that there aren't any, it's just there aren't enough of them by any stretch. It would be great if if I could pay $40 and get a queen that was going to live 4 years. So my choices are then, if I can't buy them, I'm going to have to make my own. So let's take a look at what we could maybe do, but also against the things that I'm going to have those bees be able to tolerate. And if I'm going to be raising my own queens, here's a friend from Sweden has done this, and it started it about 30 years ago, and it's called the live and let die. You get colonies and you don't do anything to them, and next season the ones that are alive you select from, and you do those all season, and the ones that are alive after that. Had we done this in the US 30 years ago, our problems with bees today would probably be far fewer. I'm not sure. It's speculation because we don't know, because we didn't do it. But they've done this in Sweden, at least to a great degree, and they've got bees that are fairly tolerant of Varroa and fairly tolerant of their extreme weather, or extreme by my standards, weather that they have there. So is this a good way to do? And indeed it probably is, because this is the way Mother Nature, of course, operates. Live and let die, and those that survive are the ones that continue to produce the next generation. The issue with adding a little help then enters into the equation, and then you start looking, okay, I've got these bees that survive the winter, but they're meaner than not, and I don't want really mean aggressive defensive bees, so I'm only going to select from those that survive but aren't mean. So then we begin to enter the equation and starting to skew the curve a little bit, and do we do anything else than that? And if you want bees that are going to survive, then you're probably not going to have a whole lot more interference. So the best of all worlds, this is what we do, or what we would like to do. This is not the best of all worlds. And the issues that we have is the people in Sweden had the luxury of being able to do this on islands that were totally, completely, absolutely isolated from interference with other bees. And I would go on to guess that almost everybody listening to this today does not have that luxury, in that you have neighbor beekeepers. Somewhere down the road there are people who have bees that got queens from Georgia last year, and those queens from Georgia are producing drones, and your bees are mating with those drones, or California or Texas or wherever that they come from. So we don't have that isolation, so our selection process isn't pristine, and to the point of being almost non-existent. Not impossible, but certainly certainly difficult because of the biology of honeybee mating, and therein lies the issue. I know that there are many groups in Ohio and Illinois and Indiana and West Virginia and Florida and Georgia and California. I know of groups in all of those places that are attempting to do this, and the way that they're attempting to do this is to get a bunch of people together in an area so that you begin to control both the queens and the drones, and that is beginning to have some success. That is what a good queen producer is: controls all of the queens and controls all of the drones that they mate with. And over enough time and with enough isolation, it begins to have an effect. Beginning to see some effects from some of these smaller groups in these various states already, in that the bees that they're selecting are becoming more adaptive to the regions that they're living in, and that's usually the first sign of what you see in those kinds of selections. But this is the one that everybody has to deal with. This is the elephant in the room, if you will, Varroa, the honeybee blood-sucking demon from hell, and this is an introduced pest. So our bees, well, of course, our bees are introduced too, but then so are our beekeepers. So we're all kind of in the same boat. But this is the newest, if you will, pest that our bees have to become adapted to. Certainly, it's adapt or die. It's not adapt and not thrive. It's adapt or die. And without selecting for survival against this pest, everything else comes in second. Now, one of the things that I want to mention is that I mentioned the Russians, and the Russians were selected. They came from Russia because they'd had a lot of exposure to Varroa. Initially, they were brought over here because they were surviving Varroa over there. They weren't thriving, but they could tolerate a Varroa population within a nest, and indeed that still is the case. If you have a bee yard that's fairly isolated and it contains nothing but Russian bees, you're going to have far fewer Varroa problems than if you have not Russians, or if you have a Russian and mixed bee yard with unequal pressure on those colonies. So Russians may be the exception here, and in fact it turns out that the people who are using who are making the selections to adapt to Russian bees or adaptive Varroa mites are bringing in the Russian genome at some level. It works. Why not use it? And it's here. Why not use it? And I certainly couldn't agree more. The issue with the Russians, again, I'll go back to their adaptive behavior in the spring, and if you're looking to have lots and lots of bees early in the spring, the Russian selections tend to be a little bit slower, and you're going to have some frustration at that level. But no matter the selection that you've made, one of the things you have to do is measure your success. And you can measure your success in terms of, are the bees alive next spring? That's the black and white measurement. The argument that I put up against that is that I don't think you have to wait that long and make that harder choice to see if your program is a success. If you are making selections starting in the spring and throughout the course of the summer, you're finding that your bees indeed aren't reducing Varroa populations, or aren't having any success in dealing with a Varroa infestation, then you have the option of, okay, I'm going to see if they're going to die anyway, or you can take that population of bees, that cluster of research bees, if you will, and add a different queen to them and see if that indeed, and the issue that I have with the black and white live and let die is that I think you're not utilizing a resource as well as you could. A full-size colony with, say, 40,000 bees that gets requeened is still a full-size colony, and you've got the resources of all of those bees that you could use to test another queen. To see how well that they're handling a mite population, and to do that you gotta do some kind of measurement. I've found the alcohol wash, and I think the people that are looking at mites mite control hard, I've found that the alcohol wash tends to be the best, the most what's the word I want? Probably the most reliable way. I've got the number down there, 1 to 3%. And the commercial beekeepers that I talk to say that if I'm testing my bees and I get infestation level 3% or less, I know that my bees are okay and I don't need to do anything. If it's when it gets to be 3% or more, then I have to step in and do some sort of behavior that is going to reduce that mite population back down to 1 or 3%. And if I don't, then the population builds, the viruses take over, and the colony is doomed. So if you're making a selection, if you're looking to not lose your bees, and you want to add some influence before they die, then this is a way to measure how well whatever it is that you're doing is working, and whatever it is you're doing may be just making selections. But if the selection you've made, you see by June, isn't working because you've got a 10 or 20% infestation, then at least you've got a measure that you can move in and do something about. It's possible to deal with Varroa without chemicals, but then you go back to the definition of natural and human inputs. So I'm not sure how to deal with that. But if I'm want my colony to live, then and the inputs that I'm okay dealing with, using resistance toxic bees we've examined, definitely first choice always. If I could find them, I'd use them. If I can't find them, then what? And then you've got things like drone trapping and midsummer splits, breaking the brood cycle. The best, in my opinion, the best way to deal with Varroa that there is to have a no brood cycle. You've got no place for Varroa to breed, and if you've got good hygienic behavior like those Africanized bees in that paper that came out, then you're shedding mites like dandruff, and you've got colonies that continue to thrive. And then you can use those resources, requeen both of those splits, or at least one of them, with a queen that you are working with on a selection that's supposed to have some resistance, and continue those colonies, measuring the effectiveness of whatever it is that they're doing by using the alcohol wash, and find out where they go. And by fall, you've got colonies that are healthy going into winter. You need to start this behavior before Varroa gets a foothold, so that you don't have a big virus population. But that goes without saying, just because of the way Varroa works. But knowing, being able to measure, and then knowing what to do, what you can do next, certainly is beneficial. Drone trapping is to me, I've got chickens, and chickens, they see me coming from the bee yard, and they're up against the fence waiting for me to get there because they know that dessert is coming. And removing Varroa and removing drone brood and the Varroa that's in the sealed drone brood is definitely a good control, but it's certainly interference. If you're looking to keep the bees alive and you want to do something, and here you get what is natural, what's not natural, the essential oils, and both of these compounds or both of these products are found in honey. So is introducing more of them a problem? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's going to help reduce the population of Varroa in a colony, and it's not going to add to wax contamination, and it's not going to harm your bees. You will have bees continue to live, and again, it's reducing the pressure and continuing to make selections that you want your bees to have, while not letting them just go into the live and let die scenario and not have them at all. Organic acids, again, the same thing. All of these are found naturally in honey and in a beehive. Formic, oxalic, and the HopGuard product. No residues in wax. They control mites, but again, you're interfering with the natural progression of bee-mite relationship, and if you're looking for a black and white outcome, then this is getting in the way of that. But on the other hand, you will have bees around to continue to test new queens with, so perhaps that's something that you need to consider. Getting away from Varroa, when you got American Foulbrood, a spore-forming bacteria, there's 3 ways to control it. You can burn it, you can feed it to wax moth, or you can use antibiotics. And burning, of course, happens in the real world. Trees burn, forest fires and all of that. That the natural control for American Foulbrood in the American West, no doubt about it. You can put it in a situation where bees can't get at it and let the wax moth consume it, but then you've still got equipment with spores on it and antibiotics. Of course, there's nothing natural about antibiotics, but it keeps your bees alive. Antibiotics, I think, are getting farther and farther away from use by beekeepers, at least for the most part, because it's getting to the point where you're going to have to get a prescription to get antibiotics for your bees to control American Foulbrood, which is something probably most of us aren't going to explore. But it's coming to that. Not very. Small hive beetle, another introduced species that our bees have had very little time to adapt to. They've got some adaptive features. They corner them in propolis traps on the inner cover, but then they feed them. Not sure exactly how that relationship works with a small hive beetle, but traps work. If you're looking to keep small hive beetle populations down, traps work. Now, where I was in Texas yesterday, small hive beetles are a really big problem, and every beekeeper has traps. 3, 4, 5 traps per hive, because if you don't have really strong colonies, and if you've got splits or packages, you don't have really strong colonies for a while, then small hive beetles are a real problem, and everybody uses traps. They're very effective. They're invasive. Definitely, you're interfering with the natural relationship of the beetle and the bee, but your colony is alive, and until it gets strong enough to control the population itself, then it's you acting on its behalf. As I said, traps work. There's all sorts of traps. Some of them are pretty non-invasive. Some of them are real invasive, but again, they do the job. If you're looking to control wax moth, of course, strong colonies are always the answer. But when it comes to things like storage, where I am here in Northeast Ohio, storage is pretty simple because we have winter, and I don't run into an issue there. And when it isn't winter, light and air seems to do the trick. If you can see the boxes stacked there. Those boxes are stacked in my garage, and they'll stay there all summer, and there won't be a wax moth in them, not a larva, not an adult, because there's light and air. If you want to test this sometime, take an old dark frame, throw it on your garage floor, leave it there for a month, come back and turn it over. Which side has been eaten out by wax moth and which side is still pristine and not touched by wax moth. And it comes to light and air. But when you have winters like you have in Texas, then that freeze option goes away, and then you need some other way to protect your bees, your stored equipment. Freezing it, gassing it, but then it comes to equipment rather than what the bees are going through. But wax moth is an issue, and strong colonies is always the first answer, but light and air certainly. Here's the issue that really is a problem. It's coming to the fore, and what we've done in the 30 years that we've had Varroa, we have really fouled our nest. And we have added chemicals to beehives, and those chemicals have stayed in the wax and they don't come out. We have done, here at the Root Company, we've done many tests to see what kinds of process reduce the chemicals in beeswax, and the standard processes that we have for dealing with wax essentially don't touch it hardly. Some of it's reduced when they go through the filtering process that we use and other candle makers use, but some of it's still there, and it's still in the foundation that you're buying, the beeswax foundation. Not much. A little bit of poison, but it's a little bit of poison, and it's something that we're going to have to confront as an industry. What do we do about this? What can we do about this? But is adding beeswax that has a little bit of poison in it the right thing to do? And that debate still has yet to be made. But I'm thinking if you're listening to this, you've already made it, and probably aren't using a whole lot of beeswax foundation anymore. Ag chemicals continue to be a plague. No matter what you do, you're not going to escape this unless you live on the moon. And none of us live there very well. So our bees are constantly exposed to ag chemicals, and then they're even exposed to every season. There's new problems out there because of the tank mixes that people are using, and you don't know the tank mixes, and we could go on and on about pesticides, but your bees are exposed to this, and they're bringing them back to the hive, and the chemicals that they're bringing back to the hive are being absorbed by the wax. That is also the big problem with beeswax foundation, is that it's got tiny amounts of ag chemicals. So if you're really keen on keeping your bees as naturally as you can, then getting rid of wax every couple of years, even if you're not using foundation, if you're just using top bar hives or frames with no foundation, that wax is going to have stuff in it after a couple of years that you need to get out of your hive. Water, of course, is everybody needs water. Bees need water. A gallon a day on a hot day. Where are they getting the water? And you have some control over that, perhaps. But is the local creek okay? But what about other sources of water? And making sure that where your bees are going is good, or if where they're going isn't good, then you providing something that is better than. What about food? And of course, I got 3 pictures of food there: pollen and honey, and after that, everything comes in third, in my opinion. There just isn't enough good food out there. If there isn't enough good food out there, then what? My first piece of advice is, if you're not trapping pollen right now, you should be, because somewhere down the road your bees aren't going to have enough of it, and you're going to want to supply it. Now it comes back to, our bees adapted to your area? And if you've got bees that have a big population when there's no food out there, because there's typically no food out there, then your bees are either going to starve, or you're going to provide them natural food. And natural food is pollen and honey. You can't get any better than that. But having bees adapted to your area is the first rule in not having bees starve, because if there's no food out there and you've got lots of bees and lots of brood, your bees screwed up, and they need to learn when to store food, when to raise brood, when not to. Take a quick look at this nectar. The natural carbohydrate source, sucrose, sugar, and water. The thing about nectar that you want to remember, it's got calcium, copper, all of those minerals in it. And the biggest thing that nectar has that sugar, water, and high fructose syrup, corn syrup doesn't have, is it's got those enzymes that turn on a honeybee's immune system. Therein lies the magic of honey. And if you're feeding anything, if you're feeding a carb to honey, or carb to your bees, sugar water is a monumentally poor substitute to honey. And if you're not saving some honey, if you don't have frames of honey stored, if you don't have frames of honey in the freezer, if you're not diluting the honey that you've extracted and feeding it back to the bees, then what you're giving them is fast food junk compared to what they normally have. So if you're feeding bees because they didn't store enough or whatever, honey's the answer. It isn't sugar syrup, and it isn't high fructose corn syrup. By any stretch, and you can, all of these things are not honey. Sugar syrup and fondant and high fructose corn syrup, all of these things are, as I said, junk food. Your bees will live, but they won't live well if this is what you're feeding them. And if your bees aren't adapted to your area and they've run out of food, or you've been a greedy beekeeper and taken all of that food away, then your job is to get food back on them, and the food that you want to be feeding them is the stuff that they should be eating normally: honey and pollen. Pollen has fats, sterols, cholesterol, lipids, phospholipids, vitamins, minerals. You can see the minerals in there. You can see how much bees eat, and it's the primary source of protein in a bee's diet for both the adults and the kids in the hive. And pollen, if you're feeding bees pollen substitute, then what you need to be thinking about is today going out and buying a pollen trap and getting some of this stuff, because if you don't have to feed protein to your bees, this is what you should be feeding them. The stuff that you can buy in packages, the pollen substitutes you can buy in packages isn't bad. I mean, we don't have Purina bee chow yet, but we're getting close, and the people who make this stuff have looked at what bees need to not only survive but thrive, and they're pretty close with this, and you don't run into the issues with, or at least they don't know that they're running into the issues with like with honey that turn on the immune system. This is just a protein source. How the bees use this protein source, whether it's dry or in a patty, of course they store the dry when they collect it, and they consume the patty and store it in their bodies when they eat it. But so when you're feeding protein in the fall, you need to do both. Don't do one, do both, because they store them in different places and use them different ways. But if your first choice, of course, is going to be making a protein patty out of real pollen instead of the stuff that we're feeding them. Management, number 4, genetic diversity, and therein lies one of the issues that making selections runs into often, is that we get too narrow a selection, and the diversity within the bee population that we end up with is such that it's not very adaptive to any place except the 4 square blocks around your house. I'm being facetious here, of course, but that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind, is when you're making these selections, is that you have to make sure that you're not down to one set of genes here that are doing well right where you are, but rather they're adaptive to a wider range of places. The biology of queens, and if you don't, then you need to learn it before you start raising them, because you got to use that biology, you got to work with that biology rather than try and bend that biology to fit what you're doing. And you can see what goes on here in terms of pheromones and all of these other things. One of the things that I want to look at real quick is one of the things that you're selecting for is a colony that makes enough food to survive whatever dearth period that it has, whether it's, Bill Mayers in Vermont says that the weather in Vermont is 9 months of winter and 3 months of bad sledding, and that if you've got that kind of a winter, then you need bees that can live there and can produce a lot of food in a short period of time. Here's the deal with productivity, and what I want to do look at in productivity is the population, and the population comes down to eggs per day on a queen, and the books will tell you how many eggs per day a queen should be laying, and they're going to say 2,000 on a productive queen in the peak season. How do you know? And the quick formula for eggs per day is you go out today and you count every cell of sealed brood in your colony, and then you come back in 12 days and you do it again, and you subtract the first number from the second number, and what you get is the number of eggs that the queen has laid since the first time you counted. You divide that by 12 and you've got eggs per day, and if it isn't 1,500 right now in June, you've got a queen, 1,500 or more, you've got a queen that you may want to look at as being less than productive. So you can look at frames and frames of brood and you say, is she productive? And without counting, it's like without counting mites, when you're looking for mite resistance, you don't know, you're guessing. So if you want a productive colony, you got to know how productive your queen is, and if she's not doing what she should be doing, you should be getting rid of her and moving something else in. When queens make their own, of course, then she's going to be going out and mating with, and therein lies the question, who's she mating with? If you're controlling the drones, you're good. If you're not, then you've got an issue. If you're bringing queens in, I got to requeen a colony is bringing in that queen from Florida or Georgia or California natural, and the issue there is probably maybe, I don't know. What do you think? And if you're looking for bees that are going to live well in your part of the world, a California queen probably is less desirable than one that's 10 generations from where you live, but again, it's availability. Can you find that queen? So if you've got to bring queens in, at least know where they're coming from and have some idea of the genetics so that you can see what it does. A colony that swarms is the healthiest colony that there is, and that's the colony you want to be looking at because it did everything right to the point where it was big enough and healthy enough and strong enough to swarm. So this is the kind of genetics you're looking for. So then you begin selecting for colonies that swarm, but you can control that, I think. Is it natural to take what the bees have earned? And I guess the answer to that is how high can you stack your boxes? And at some point you're going to take some of this and save a lot of it for feeding perhaps, or to feeding weaker colonies down the road and the rest of your operation. But normally bees will not share what they have worked hard to make, and for us taking what we do is probably less than desirable. But at the same time, how high can you stack boxes? So what about protection? When I was in Wisconsin working with Eric Erickson, we looked at the R value of trees, and we did a lot of bee trees that had been removed by loggers up in northern Wisconsin, and of course the R value varies, but it's certainly much better than the wooden boxes that we put bees in now. And when you look at how a nest is formed in a hollow tree, the R value, the entrances, the ventilation, all of those things are, from a bee's perspective, probably better than the boxes that we put them in. And then we wrap them in cardboard and tar paper and all of these things to try and make up for that. And is that any better? But then is keeping bees in a hollow tree keeping bees? So the trade-off is something that you have to wrestle with. I wrap colonies every year, and for me, putting that box on or wrapping them in tar paper is the natural windbreak, as opposed to trying to find something that I can put my colonies next to. When you're getting ready for winter, one of the things that, are your bees adapted to where they are? And if they are, they're going to hunker down and there's not going to be a whole lot of brood, and they're going to have enough food, or are you going to help them out and take care of them by wrapping and feeding and doing all of those things? We've talked about the food that you're feeding. If you have to feed because they haven't stored enough or there wasn't enough, then it's going to be not sugar syrup and not pollen substitute, but honey and pollen. And there we are. We're just a little bit over Denise, but we got around the sound problem, and I think we're close. Are we?
Oh, we're doing great, Kim. Thank you so much. Do you want to take a few questions? I just opened the chat pod. We can see what questions come in.
If you've got time, I've got time.
Okay, awesome. So Alan has a question. What do you think about monoculture these days relating to honeybees? Certainly not natural. How does it affect bees?
Well, I'm gathering you're thinking something like the 9 million acres of soybeans we have here in Ohio, or if you're looking at almonds. Almonds is a monoculture. It's the best crop you can imagine for honeybees for about a month in February, but after that it's a desert. So is it natural? Not even close. And is it good? Yeah, for 2 weeks it's good, but then after that, not good at all. And pick a crop. Monocultures are great for a short period of time, and deserts afterwards.